Yo, welcome back to another video. Now today's video is going to be going over the new familiar that came out with update 6.5's portals. This is the strange cat. This is a bit later than what I should have done, but I was doing my Worldlines video. If you haven't checked it out and are still needing to do Worldlines, please go check out my channel or it'll be in the description below. But yeah, let's get straight into this video. We'll be going over the strange cat. I do like the look of this familiar. This familiar, I believe, is like a mini cat-sized version of the arc that we have in game. This is from the Fate series as well. How to obtain this familiar: it is obtained from the wooden chests from the new spring portals. You have a 10% chance to get a wooden chest from a spring portal any tier, and then from there it is a 10% chance to obtain the familiar from those wooden chests. Okay, so let's get straight into the cat's passives. So first passive that they have is Luck of the Gods. This increases damage by 6.4% and range by 1.8%. This familiar can be corrupted up to 5 times. If this familiar rolls corruption 2, it can no longer be corrupted and corruption 2 is not applied. Damage can either roll between 0 and 7% damage, and range can roll between 0 and 3.5% range. The strange cat's second passive, Season of Flowers. This can roll any element and can roll between 2 and 5% damage. So looking at this familiar, it is not the craziest looking familiar. When you look at it for the first glance, it is not doing a crazy amount of damage and is not doing a crazy amount of range. But the good or the insane thing about this familiar is that it can be corrupted up to 5 times. This means that you can hit corruption 3 5 times on it, or even corruption 4 5 times on it. Corruption 4 on this familiar I think is the best way to roll on this familiar. Corruption 3 is also really good. If you have a max rolled familiar and hit max C3 every single time 5 times in a row, you're going to have crazy stupidly good familiar, but that is near impossible. So the better option is to be going for corruption 4. But let's get straight into going over the corruption 3 rolls. Okay, so going over the example for the C3 range of a mid roll to basically being better, there are going to be a lot of slides, or I guess images for this. There are going to be 5 total because this can be corrupted up to 5 times. So this is basically showing examples of what your rolls can be like when you are corrupting being relatively lucky, not being lucky and then unlucky, you know, just overall relatively lucky. So for the min roll range example I have here, it is a 7.3% chance. This is going from a 5.6% damage and getting it increased by 30% with a C3. So that is the min range roll that we are using as an example of like a somewhat decently good corruption with C3. And then for the range, it is a 2.8% range. Both of these stats that I am using are 80% of the max roll. I feel like this is what you want to be at least using before you corrupt it. Otherwise, I feel like it's kind of a waste to use it on a lower rolled version. This is the first corruption example. It is at a range of 7.3% to 10.5% damage. And for the range, it is 3.6% to 5.3% range. This is for the first corruption. From here, it starts off low, but it does gradually get higher and higher. So let's go on to the second example. Okay, so to not make this too long, for all of the remaining images, I am just going to say what corruption we're up to and say the percentages for the damage and range. So for the second corruption, the damage percentages is between 9.5% and 15.8%, and the range is between 4.7% and 7.9%. Onto the third corruption, damage goes to 12.3% and 23.6%, and range goes to 6.2% and 11.8%. For the fourth corruption, damage goes to 16% and 35.4%, and range goes to 8% and 17.7%. And for the fifth corruption, if you have been extremely lucky and gotten 5 C3s in a row, you can probably expect with a good corruption luck 20.8% damage and 53.2% damage, and for range it's 10.4% and 26.6% range. Now for the upper bracket, as you can see, the 53% and 26% range and damage, those are if you had a max roll on range and damage and got 50% increased C3 5 times in a row. That is pretty much impossible. I would be surprised if anyone gets anywhere near that. And then for the low end of the 20% and 10%, that is basically basically your initial 80% maxed roll and getting at least 30% each time. Of course, it might be higher or lower depending if you just didn't get 30%. But yeah, these are all of the examples for the C3 corruption ranges basically. All right, and going on to the next thing, we are going to be just talking about corruption 4s and how they work with this familiar. So for corruption 4, typically when you roll it, it will give you an element and it will roll that element between 1 and 10% damage. Now with this familiar, if I were to get passion and it rolls a 6% damage, for the first time when you look at it, it will be passion for 6% damage. I hit it again, it gets another corruption 4. It's holy this time and it rolled 7%. Instead of it being passion for 6% and holy for 7%, what it does is it adds those two numbers together, so it will be 13% total, and that will be for holy and for passion units, which is very, very strong. This means that you can get up to a total of 50% increased damage if you're very, very lucky. The average that I'm expecting a good roll would be is between maybe 20 to 25 all the way up to maybe 35 to 40. I don't expect anything above 40 too much, as trying to get 4 of the same exact corruption is super, super rare. If you get anywhere between a 20 to like, let's say 35 to 40% in that roll, it is a very, very good familiar that you have gotten yourself, especially if you can get it for all 5 different elements. That is the RNG part, is if you get an element that you're really, really wanting for a unit, then you've hit the jackpot. You can also roll the exact same element when you're doing corruption 4. So let's say the example I did earlier for the 13% damage, instead of getting a passion and a holy, I get 2 passions. It will just show up as passion for 13% damage instead. The other thing with corruption 4s is the elements that it can roll is technically like a check mark. It will check the units that have that element, and if they do, then they'll give them that damage. It doesn't check them all separately, so if there are any units that have multiple elements, they will not benefit from each of their elements. It will only benefit from basically just one of them. So if I had an unbound and holy roll for 13%, Gilgamesh will only get the 13% damage and not the 26% damage. This is what I thought initially, but it is not going to be double dipping, so that's kind of unlucky, but you know, it would be very busted if that was the case. But yeah, overall, I think this familiar is super good. When it comes to raw damage that you can get from this familiar, it is higher than Burb. It is a lot more common to get than Burb as well, a lot easier to roll. If you have a bunch of corruption crystals, I definitely would highly recommend farming out a bunch of this familiar. It will be around for a limited amount of time and you can get really, really insane rolls with this. Of course, I think Burb is still overall better, but when it comes to just raw damage and just how easy it is to obtain, this is a better option for now, until the future, you know. If you play Path of Exile or have played Path of Exile, you might notice one thing with the Strange Cat, and that is that it is an inspiration made from the Hands of the High Templar glove. So if I go ahead and identify these, as you can see, it says right on the second line, you can have up to 5 explicit modifiers while this item has this modifier. This can be modified while corrupted, meaning that it can be corrupted multiple times. So if I go ahead, let's do a live demonstration. Let's see if I can get any explicit modifiers on this. Okay, the first one, nothing. Oh, there we go. So we got minion gems. Keep going. Enfeeble on hit. Keep going. Warcry gems. And then we ended up bricking it. So basically hitting corruption 2, it's unusable now. Do the same thing with this one. And then I have another pair that is a good pair. We instantly bricked it on the first one. All right. As you can see with this one has 5 total modifiers above this like orange line. You can see this is the explicit modifiers. This is basically what the Strange Cat is referring to. I think it's a pretty cool thing. And then also, last thing before I end things off, have a Aventor's Gamble, which if you did not know, this is what the Burb is inspired after. It is able to roll positive and negative numbers essentially. And yeah, it's a whole bunch of random different things. It can either be the best ring in the game basically, or the worst ring. So yeah, that is pretty much it when it comes to Path of Exile. This is basically the end of this familiar showcase. I hope you have enjoyed. I appreciate it if you have watched this far through the video. See ya.